My late wife, Joan, used to say that the best thing we ever built together wasn't the house in Oakville, it was our family. She'd say it at the dinner table, usually when our daughter was doing something ridiculous like trying to feed the dog or broccoli. We'd laugh, and she'd shake her head, and I'd think, yeah, she's right. That was enough. That was everything. Joan passed 8 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end, and I was there for every single one of those days. After that, it was just me and our daughter, Lily. She was 23 when we lost her mother. Old enough to handle it, young enough that it still cracked something open in her that never quite healed the same way. I won't pretend those first 2 years were easy. I kept busy. I'd spent 31 years working as a structural engineer for a firm in Hamilton, and after I retired, I took on contract inspections, bridges, overpasses, municipal buildings. Kept my mind sharp. Kept me from sitting in that house in Oakville thinking about a woman who was no longer in it. Lily and I talked every Sunday. That was our thing. She'd moved to Vancouver for work. She's a graphic designer, very talented. And the time difference meant we usually talked in the evenings, her time. Late afternoon mine. We'd catch up on whatever was happening. She'd tell me about a project she was working on. I'd tell her about whatever book I was reading or what the neighbors were up to. Ordinary things. Good things. Then she met Kyle. I don't want to be unfair to Kyle. He's from a wealthy family in West Vancouver. His father runs a commercial real estate company, the kind that has its name on the side of office towers. Kyle works for his father, which means he's never really had to build anything from the ground up. He's 32, well-dressed, confident in the way that people are when they've never been told no, in a way that actually cost them something. When Lily introduced us at Christmas dinner 2 years ago, he shook my hand firmly, called me sir, and spent most of the meal talking about a condo development they were doing in Kitsilano. He wasn't rude. He was just elsewhere. Even when he was sitting right there, Lily was different around him. Quieter. She laughed at his jokes, even when they weren't particularly funny. She looked at him the way you look at something you're not sure you're allowed to have, and it made me uneasy in a way I couldn't fully name at the time. Over the following year, our Sunday calls got shorter. Then they started being rescheduled. Kyle and I have plans, she'd say. Or, we're doing brunch with his parents. I told myself this was normal. She was in a serious relationship. Of course her Sundays were changing. Then she called me on a Wednesday, which she never did, and told me Kyle had proposed. She sounded happy. I told her I was happy for her. I meant it. I sent her flowers that same afternoon. The wedding talk started almost immediately. Kyle's parents apparently had certain expectations about what the wedding should look like, and those expectations involved a venue on Vancouver Island, a guest list of about 200 people, and a budget that made my eyes water when Lily casually mentioned it during a call in March. It's going to be around $340,000, Dad. I had to put the phone down for a second. I picked it back up. Who's paying for this? Well, she said, in that careful voice she uses when she knows something won't land well. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. What followed was a conversation I've replayed many times since. Billy explained that Kyle's parents were contributing $120,000. She and Kyle were putting in $30,000 of their own savings. That left a gap of around $190,000. And she and Kyle thought that I might want to contribute that portion. It's your only daughter's wedding, Dad, she said. And I know you have the savings. She wasn't wrong about the savings. I'd been careful my whole life. Joan and I had paid off the house in Oakville years before she got sick. My pension from the engineering firm was solid. I had investments. I was comfortable. But $190,000 was not a number I could say yes to without genuinely thinking about it. And more than that, the phrasing bothered me. Not would you be able to help, but we thought you might want to contribute that portion. As if the number had already been assigned to me. As if I'd already agreed. I told Lily I needed some time to think. The following week, I drove up to visit my brother in Barrie. He's 4 years older than me, retired from teaching high school history, and he's the kind of person who says exactly what he thinks without being unkind about it. I told him the whole story over coffee at his kitchen table. He listened. He nodded. Then he said, "Did they ask you, or did they tell you?" I thought about it. "They told me." He nodded again. "And were you invited to be part of planning this wedding, or just part of paying for it?" That was the question that sat with me for the rest of the drive home. I called Lily that Sunday and told her I was willing to contribute something meaningful toward the wedding, but that $190,000 was more than I was prepared to commit. I suggested $50,000. I told her I wanted to be involved, to help choose things, to be consulted, to feel like I was a father of the bride and not just a line item in a budget. There was a long silence. "Kyle's mom already booked the venue," she said. "The deposit was $50,000. They did it assuming you were in for the full amount." "When did they assume that?" "A few weeks ago." Nobody had told me. Nobody had asked me. They had simply decided I was good for nearly $200,000 and moved forward accordingly. I stayed calm. I told Lily that I hadn't agreed to that, and that if commitments had been made without my knowledge, those were not my commitments to honor. She got quiet in a way that felt less like sadness and more like frustration being held very carefully in check. We ended the call politely, and I sat in my living room for a long time afterward, looking out at the backyard. The dogwood Joan had planted the year we moved in was blooming. It does every May without fail. Over the next month, I heard less from Lily. When we did talk, it was mostly surface things: the weather, my brother's health, what she'd been watching on TV. The wedding wasn't mentioned again directly, but I could feel it sitting in every conversation like something neither of us wanted to knock over. Then in early June, I received an email. It was from Kyle. The subject line was "Wedding Contribution, Updated Breakdown," and it contained an itemized list of vendors and their costs, with a column at the far right labeling each as either Ashworth Family, Lily and Kyle, or Dad. The amounts in my column added up to $187,400. There was no greeting at the top. No question, just a spreadsheet, and at the bottom a single line: "Please let us know your preferred method of transfer by the end of the month." I read it twice. Then I printed it out, which I haven't done with an email in years, and I put it on my kitchen table and I looked at it. The line items in my column included venue balance owing, catering per head count for my side of the guest list, floral arrangements, a 3-piece jazz band for the cocktail hour, 2 nights at the resort for the wedding party, and, I still think about this, a drone videography package at $4,200. I had not been consulted on any of these choices. I did not request a jazz band. I did not know anyone who needs drone footage of a wedding I had not yet been confirmed to attend. I called Lily that evening. I asked her directly whether she'd seen the email Kyle had sent me. "He mentioned he was sending it," she said. "Did you know the amounts?" "Yes." "Did you know he hadn't asked me first?" Silence. "Lily," I said, "I love you, and I want you to have a beautiful wedding, but I need you to understand that I haven't agreed to any of this. Not the venue, not the catering, not the drone. I need to be asked, not invoiced." She said she understood. She sounded tired. I think she was tired. But then she said something that has stayed with me. "Dad, Kyle's family is going to think you're being difficult." "I'm not difficult," I said quietly. "I'm just not an ATM." I didn't hear from Lily for 11 days after that. Not a text, not a call, nothing. I gave her space. On the 12th day, she called and told me that Kyle's mother had suggested, and that Lily had agreed, that it might be simpler if I wasn't in the wedding party. Not at the wedding. Just not standing up front. Easier for the photos, apparently. Better for the flow of the day. I asked if I would still be invited as a guest. There was a pause. "Of course," she said. But the pause was too long. I said I'd think about it, and we hung up, and then I sat with that for about a week before I understood what was actually happening. I was being managed out, made smaller and smaller, first from the planning, then from the party, now edged toward the margins of the guest list, while my money was being kept front and center. I'm 63 years old. I spent my career calculating load-bearing capacity. I know what a structure looks like when the weight isn't distributed right. I called my financial advisor, a steady woman named Patricia, who I've worked with for 15 years, and immediately caught myself. The name was already taken. I'll call her by her role, my advisor. She confirmed what I already suspected. Liquidating the amount Kyle had listed in his spreadsheet would mean touching registered accounts, paying withholding taxes, disrupting the income structure I'd built for retirement. Even setting aside the question of whether I wanted to give this money, the how of it would cost me additionally. I wrote a letter. Old-fashioned, I know. But I wanted it to be something that couldn't be screenshotted and sent around in pieces. I addressed it to Lily and to Kyle together. I told them clearly that I was not in a position to contribute the amount they had outlined, that I had not been consulted on the decisions that were made in my name, and that I was choosing to step back from the financial arrangement entirely. I told Lily that I loved her, that her mother would have wanted her to be happy, and that nothing in this letter changed that. I told Kyle, politely but without ambiguity, that a family is built on communication and respect, and that receiving an invoice for services I hadn't chosen was not something I was prepared to accept as a starting point for our relationship. I sent it by registered mail. I kept a copy. For a while, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. Kyle's mother called me. She was not unkind, but she was very direct. She told me that the venue had already been booked on the understanding of my contribution, and that if I was withdrawing, the family would need to significantly restructure the event. She said this in the tone of someone informing me of a natural disaster I had personally caused. I told her I was sorry for any confusion, but that I had never confirmed any contribution in writing, and that verbal assumptions made without my participation were not binding. She said, "This is Lily's day." I said, "I know. That's why I've been asking to be included in it." She didn't have much to say to that. The week before the wedding, Lily called me. She told me that, given everything that had happened, she and Kyle had decided it would be better if I didn't attend the ceremony. She said it wasn't about punishing me. It was about the energy on the day. She said she hoped I understood. I told her I loved her. I told her I hoped it was a beautiful day. I didn't argue, because I knew arguing would only confirm what Kyle's family had decided about me. That I was the difficult one, the problem, the reason things hadn't gone smoothly. I wasn't going to give them that. I spent that Saturday quietly. I drove out to the Niagara Escarpment in the morning and walked one of the trails Joan and I used to do together. It was a clear day, good visibility all the way to the lake. I stopped at a lookout we'd always liked and stood there for a while thinking about the fact that somewhere on Vancouver Island, my daughter was getting married and I wasn't there. I won't pretend that didn't hurt. It hurt quite a lot, but I also knew, and this is the thing I kept coming back to, that I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd been asked for nearly $200,000 without being asked at all. I'd been excluded from every decision while being kept responsible for every bill. I'd been moved out of the wedding party and then out of the wedding itself, while my money was presumed to still be en route. I had said no to the money. And it turned out that once the money was gone, so was my seat at the table. That tells you everything you need to know. A month after the wedding, I got a voicemail from Lily. She sounded different, softer somehow. She said she wanted to talk. I called her back the next afternoon. She told me that the wedding had been beautiful, but that the planning had been one of the most stressful experiences of her life, that Kyle's mother had controlled every detail, that the flowers weren't what she'd wanted, that the jazz band had played during the dinner, even though she'd asked for something quieter, that the drone footage, the $4,000 drone footage, had focused almost entirely on the venue and barely showed the guests at all. She laughed a little when she said that. A tired laugh. Then she said, "I should have talked to you more, Dad. I should have asked instead of just going along with what they said." I didn't say, "I told you so." I'm not built that way. I just said, "I'm glad you're telling me now." We talked for almost 2 hours that day, the longest call we'd had in over a year. It's not fixed, whatever happened. Things like that don't fix quickly. Kyle and I still have a long way to go, and I don't know what that relationship will eventually look like. His family has a way of doing things that I don't think is going to change because I had one hard conversation with his mother. Lily is still finding her footing in that marriage, still figuring out who she is inside a family that has a lot of opinions about who she should be. But she called me last Sunday, and the Sunday before that. We're back to our regular calls. I'm still in the house in Oakville. The dogwood is done blooming for this year, but it'll come back. It always does. Joan planted it in rocky soil and everyone said it wouldn't take. And it proved every last one of them wrong. Some things, if you give them room to breathe and don't force them into shapes they weren't meant to hold, will find their way back to what they were supposed to be. I think my daughter is one of those things. And I think I'll be here when she does.